I have talked to so many different types of expert guests in the 3.5 years that I've hosted Seeing Other People, and I am so excited because today is a new kind of expert that I think is going to bring not I think, I know is going to bring so much value to every single person listening. Danielle Hatton, welcome to Seeing Other People.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. I feel nervous about that preemption.
No, but it's so cool. I mean, listen, I talk to so many different types of therapists and authors and experts, but I've never talked to or even really explored the idea of a hypnotherapist. And you're a
Yeah.
CBT hypnotherapist with you focus on dating and relationship anxiety, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
That is so cool.
hmm Yeah, it's such a unique way of helping people with dating and relationships because, we're kind of familiar a lot with like talk therapy and not so much with the somatic side of things and our mind and our subconscious and the way that our body is trained and wired to respond to different things. And I know for myself, I tried for a long time to just like talk things through, and that was really helpful and helped in a lot of ways. But there are some things that are trained in your body and in your mind that, unless we kind of work with that, it just continues to keep repeating the same pattern. And some people listening might even relate to that. Like we hear the ways how we can behave different and we can do different things. And we're like, I want to do that, but I keep repeating the same patterns. And so we can work in hypnosis to help us change those things and actually like ingrain it in our body before it even happens itself.
That is so cool, and something that I feel like people might not initially think, "Oh, that's an option," or, "Oh, that might be something that could help me," but just in what I've learned about you since we were connected, I've been so blown away by your methods and just what you put out there, and I'm like, "Wow, like, I could have used this at
Mhm.
so many different points in my 20s, in my
Mm.
singlehood, in my, like, most anxious periods."
Mm.
Did you ever work with a hypnotherapist?
Yes, I did. I worked with a hypnotherapist for different things. I had a really bad relationship to the subway. So I actually lived in New York for 4 years and I was totally fine, like loved the subway, like felt really liberated getting on it and like the freedom of it and the flexibility. And yeah, it kind of felt like a Sex in the City moment every time I'd go on the subway. And then one time I went on the subway and I just felt really claustrophobic and I had a panic attack in the subway station because I couldn't get out. When it's like rush hour and the escalators are just like full and there's no way out, you just got to be patient. Well, it started making me really anxious and I had a panic attack. And from that moment, for the last like year and a half of me living in New York, I couldn't get in the subway. And it was so expensive. Like it caused me so much like prohibition and yeah, it was just like, really hard. And so I ended up working with a hypnotherapist to help me retrain my response to the underground. Because after that, I lived in London and it was the same thing. It was just carrying it forward into the tube, and that was causing me more distress. And so I worked with a hypnotherapist to overcome that. And through that process, I really learned about managing your anxiety and thought stopping. So, like, I would have a thought, oh my God, this is going to be bad. And then that would create an anxious response. And then I'd be like, oh my God, now I'm anxious, which would create more of an anxious response. And then it would just cycle. So I learned that process and then I was able to apply it to different areas, which then I went on to do in my dating life.
That is such a cool origin story. I love learning about how people got to where they are because it usually, especially like in this world, does come from some like very personal, unique experience. And
Yeah.
it is so interesting to think about how what's going on in our mind really does impact what's going on in our bodies. And it's
Mhm.
something that when we're going through it, it's hard to like differentiator. It's hard to figure out like where is this anxiety coming from and how is it
Yeah.
actually showing up for me. And when you go through something like that with the claustrophobia and like having that panic attack, it's really all consuming
Yeah.
and it can be so terrifying. And that can happen in every different facet of life. And I know everyone listening is like nodding along, being like, yeah, I'm so anxious and have panic attacks about my dating life
Mhm.
and go down complete spirals and don't know how
Yeah.
to, you know, get afloat again. So I'm really excited to dive into all the things.
Mhm. Yeah, and hypnotherapy, I feel like people when they hear about it, they just think of like smoking sensation and fear of flying and that kind of thing. But it can be so applicable to many other areas of your life with like confidence and self-esteem and behaviors and yeah, just really rewiring.
Yeah. So like just to bust some myths right now, hypnotherapy is it or is it not someone being there like waving the thing back and forth being like you will go on the subway and the tube without fear? Like is that it at all?
That's not it at all. No. Actually,
Okay.
hilariously though, like that's not it. But when I went to college for hypnotherapy, they sent me like my manuals and things, and with it, they sent me a pendulum, and I was like, "What is happening? This is not what I thought it
Oh
was
my
going to
god.
be." But the pendulum is like a trust response, so that's kind of like used for something else. But I was like nervous that that was what it was going to be. So hypnotherapy is not that. They're definitely, people could use something like that, but that's not what I do in my practice. Um, what we're doing is we're going into a theta state. So, that state basically between when you're falling asleep and then being asleep. And it's very, you're awake, but you're not awake, and you're aware, but you're not aware. And you're very suggestible in that state. So, hypnosis is basically focused attention. So you're putting your attention when you're in this theta state, you're in a really, really relaxed state, which is why, the swinging of the pendulum thing is kind of used because that's making you go into like a really relaxed state. So then you're really, really, really just opening your body. And then when you're in that state, we go into what's called focused attention. So we start thinking or seeing or repeating things that are beneficial to what it is that we want to improve upon. And that's when we're working with the subconscious and with the body, because that state is when what we call is the mind is the most flexible. So it's the most suggestible. And that's how we can kind of, without going too sciencey, is rewire the brain. So we're firing off new neurons in the brain that are connecting, that are creating new ways, new pathways of thinking and being.
That is so cool.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like I don't know what else to say besides that is so cool.
Yeah, but it's like we're
Yeah.
doing that every day, whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing, or whether we're doing it in hypnosis or we're not doing it in hypnosis. But it's the things that you're repeating to yourself, you start believing, right? So if you're telling
Right.
yourself things over and over again, then you're going to start acting and responding in that way. And so when we're in hypnosis, we're just in an extremely like more powerful place for us to be telling ourselves that are things that are really supportive so that we can keep those things stronger. Because
Mhm.
if you're, like affirmations, for example, and people start saying at the beginning, mostly at the beginning of your healing journey, stand in front of the mirror and tell yourself, I'm beautiful, and all of these things. Well, the
Mhm.
contradicting thoughts against that are so strong because up until that point, you might have been telling yourself, I'm not, like my skin's broken out, or I'm, my clothes are bad, or I'm ugly, or whatever the thoughts you've had or been told in your past. And so when you're saying, I am beautiful, it's just kind of going in one ear and one out the other because you're not actually in a place for you to receive that, because all of the other thoughts that are telling you that's not true are going to override that. But in hypnosis, we can shut off the conscious mind so that we're not being just like thrown all of these other thoughts that are kind of prohibiting that new positive thought to be taken in.
Is it like a learned skill to get into that state? Like sort of like with meditation, sometimes it can take people a long time to actually be able to like relax and turn off parts of their brain and like
Mhm.
focus in on that? Or is it something that like with your help, with an expert's help, like you can just like get them there?
Yeah, so nearly every person can be in hypnosis pretty soon, but some people are more suggestible than others, or like able to do hypnosis more than others. And the real thing behind that is just their desire to do it. So hypnosis is basically built upon how much you want it to happen. So, have you ever heard of like hypnosis shows, like where there's
Mhm.
like a hypnotist and somebody gets up on stage and then the hypnotist starts making them do things? And Well, the reason why that works is because the hypnotist goes around the entire audience scanning out for the person who is most wanting it to work. Like they're the person who's like, I want to like be hypnotized. I want to do this. And that person is so suggestible. Not only that, but they're at the
Mhm.
front of a room with so much pressure of this should work on them that they naturally start doing the things that they've been told to do in hypnosis. So any person can be hypnotized unless you're like, I don't want to be hypnotized, because you're able to stop yourself from doing that, which is also a really beautiful thing because you obviously want to be safe and you don't want somebody doing something to you that you're not available for or that is not supportive for you. You will only ever take on suggestions that are helpful and that you want to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes sense. And I can see how it's like the person who really wants to do it is going to be the most suggestive, like
Right.
suggestible versus somebody who's like, I don't believe in this. I don't buy it. Like I
Yeah.
have the control over my body and my brain. You don't. And
Mhm.
then it wouldn't,
Yeah.
probably wouldn't happen. Wow. Okay. I have so many more questions, but I also want to get into like the dating anxiety of it all. So in order to do that, I would love to first start with your
Mm,
dating journey
yeah.
in your 20s, which I know is a bit of a wild ride.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that I think I have always wanted and seeked love and attention and validation from men. I remember being 14 and literally applying for a TV show where it was like kids in school and it was called Crush, and you would get like the chance to be like known by your crush in your
Yes.
school. So humiliating though, because if that was on TV and your crush wasn't interested, like pure rejection, probably traumatized for life. But as far back as I can remember, I'd just been
Yeah.
like obsessed with guys and wanting love, and stems back to childhood and all of those things. So I think in my early 20, well, like my when I was like 18, 19, I was chasing men and like drunk and doing the whole thing and very unconscious, not really like looking for a relationship, so to say, but just curious about guys. And then when I was 19, I
Mhm.
entered a relationship that ended up being a long-time relationship with my ex. And that relationship was really like wholesome. Like I wouldn't say that there was anything really like wrong with it. I just didn't have the skills or the knowledge or the knowing or the maturity to establish a relationship with him that was healthy and supportive and that would be something that would benefit my life really. It wasn't like problematic, so to say, but it was just like baseline. Wasn't that like thrilling or exciting? And we were engaged. We got engaged and we were planning our entire wedding. And our wedding was in 2 months' time. And the pandemic hit, which meant that we had to cancel our wedding, push it back a year. And within inside of that time, I decided to call off the relationship and left the relationship, ended my engagement, moved back to England from America, and just went on like a whole new journey with inside of myself. And we can pause there if you want to like discuss any of that before I go on to like
Yeah.
what's now.
We could spend the whole time talking about that. But I think the one thing I'll ask is like, what led you to decide to call it off? I think that's something where it's just it's a big decision.
Yeah.
It's a scary decision. It's also everybody's watching.
Mm-hmm.
And that adds a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So, what made you so sure that this wasn't it?
Mm.
And did you like go back and forth a lot on like, should I stay, should I go? Or once you knew, did you just know?
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely like all eyes on you. And because there was nothing terrible about the relationship, made it even more challenging. It'd be easy to walk away if he was abusive or if, I'd done something terrible or, if there was something kind of a reason to leave other than a knowing. And I did spend like 3 months kind of going back and forth, feeling it out. I had this just I don't even know how to describe it, but just a deep desire to be single, which seems so strange. But I'd never been single in my 20s or like really as a woman, and I was at this point really discovering who I was and my ambition. And I think I'd been so codependent and wrapped in a relationship equals safety and that I'm a good person and that I'm beautiful and that I'm loved and just all of these things. And without that, who am I and what am I going to do? And am I going to succeed? And, will people still like me? Are people going to judge me? I'm going to be 25 and which to me felt so old, but now like is so young. I just like felt really afraid of being alone and I didn't know what that looked like. And I didn't know if I could handle that and how that would affect the other areas of my life. And so I went back and forth on it for a long time. And I just kind of came to the conclusion that this isn't what I want. And something within inside of me knows that there is something bigger and more beautiful and more alive and that would be way more nourishing. And I just had to have faith and I had to trust and I just had to take that leap and trust in God. And um, yeah, ended up being the best thing that I ever did. Really hard, but
That's
great.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh my god, I mean, I can't even imagine, and also your desire to be single during a time where the world is on lockdown. It's hard to date and be single, but you knew you were like, I have unfinished business with myself, with human connection, with the world, with other people I could meet, like, I think you knew, like you said, like, there was more out there for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it wasn't like I had a desire to go and date other people. So I wasn't, okay, I need to leave this relationship because there's someone else that I want to pursue, or there is something, I want to be in the dating world right now. I just felt like I needed to. Actually, I don't even know if I had the awareness around that I needed to like do my own work. At that point, it was just like something bigger knew that I needed to go on this path and would guide me into what's next for me.
Wow. That's amazing. Kudos to you. Definitely a hard thing to do, but obviously so worth it and paid off and was the right decision. So, as are becoming this independent person, you move back to the UK, you're now on your own. What was that discovery period like? You're really like in this really transformative stage of your life,
Mhm.
and suddenly the person that was by your side for years is no
Mhm.
longer there. And what was there ever a point of like, "Oh my god, what did I do?" Or were you like, "No,
Mhm.
this is my time now?"
Yeah, I definitely went through like a major stage of grief. It felt like I was grieving a life that I thought that I was going to have, and had like all of these visions of what this life was going to be together, and just different, obviously, discussions about the future. And now I was like grieving all of that and grieving just the person that I was. Not only had left the relationship, but I'd moved back in with my parents back to England. So it was very like rock bottom, like kind of like left everything behind. And I there was definitely moments where I was like, what the hell am I doing? And like, what the hell have I done? I've just kind of like blown up my life. But it wasn't like I should go back. It wasn't, I regret this decision and I need to go fix it. In that period of time, I just was very like low and taking care of myself and really soft and gentle with myself, which was nice. But it was in that period where I started to like notice all of my codependency like really root up, because I didn't have the awareness before that I was codependent. But it was in this time where I did, because I noticed that I'd start like going on apps and like looking for guys, and I'd get a hit of validation, then I'd feel okay again. But if I hadn't heard back from them, then I would feel anxious and like low and worthless and just kind of like in that route. And I was like, wow, I'm really noticing that I'm gripping for safety within some guy's validation. Doesn't matter who it is, but it just felt really good for me to have that from somebody. And when it wasn't, like when I didn't have somebody's attention on me, then I would feel really low and challenged. And I needed to, once I got that awareness, I knew that I needed to do something about that, because that wasn't a cycle that I wanted to be in. And I really hated the feeling of anxiety and the in between of like waiting for somebody's text message and just feeling enmeshed within people who I didn't even know yet.
Yes, you're preaching to the choir, here, and that is definitely, I mean, I think some of my lowest moments were that spiral of, "Why haven't they texted me back?" Or, like, they're posting on Instagram, they're active on Instagram, and they're not responding to me, like, am I not worthy of a response? Does that mean I'm not worthy of love? Am I going to be alone forever? What's wrong with me? And it's like the littlest thing of like not having that instant validation can just set you off and make you feel so low and so worthless. But that's what happens when you attach your self worth to literally anybody who will give you the time of day.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it.
So, how do we break that cycle? How do we get out of this constant obsessing over people and being codependent to anybody else's validation?
hmm Yeah. So, one of the biggest things is awareness, right? We want to be aware of this cycle. So, once we can catch the repeating pattern that's happening, so we can note, okay, why we feel like, let's say that you notice that you're feeling anxious all the time. When is it when you feel the most anxious, and what's happening around that? Like, what is the trigger that's creating that anxiety? Okay, so it's that the guy hasn't texted you back. Well, what are we making that mean about yourself? So then, like, looking at the beliefs that you have about yourself, if you're not getting the attention or the validation that you need, and then questioning those beliefs. So, like, is that belief really true? Where does that come from? Why are you making that person your god? Why are you putting that person on a pedestal? What is this belief, and is it serving you, or is there a different belief that could be more true? And then in hypnosis, what we do is we retrain the belief. So we might say, I am really worthy, or I can feel calm in the in between. It doesn't have to be that you believe the strongest thing. So if we can't quite get to I am worthy, I am deserving, if we can't quite get there yet, we can just do I'm allowed to be calm. I'm allowed to trust. I can feel peace now. And just kind of like shift that. And then it's also noticing and changing your reaction to something. So learning how to self-soothe. So when you notice that you're feeling anxious, rather than then reaching for vices, whether it might be picking up your phone and going on the dating app and finding somebody else, or messaging an ex, or I don't know, reaching for food or alcohol or smoking or anything, reaching externally, it's being able to sit with yourself and saying, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now. This feels really challenging for me. I'm feeling on edge, and I'm telling myself that I'm unworthy, and that's making me feel this way. What do I need to remind myself? And sitting with yourself rather than running. And the more that we do that, the more we're reminding ourselves, I am safe, like I am loved, this is okay, I'm okay, I'm here with me. And we can re-regulate, and then we can think more clearly, and then we can act more clearly too.
Yeah, so it really does take that awareness as the first step to then figure out like, okay, I'm feeling this way because of this thing, but why am I letting this control my thoughts? And what's a better story I could tell myself? Because we also go down the road of assuming so many things. If someone's not texting us back, we tell ourselves the worst case scenario. And guess what? Like, the worst case scenario actually isn't that bad. Like, okay, so you don't see this random guy that you've met twice ever again. Like, your life will go on. But we tell ourselves again, we don't just say, well, I'm never going to see this guy again. We say, like, nobody's ever going to love me.
So there's, yeah, it's really challenging in that period when you're in that response to think so rationally, to be like, it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter that this guy doesn't care. It's like my 7-year-old self is feeling so abandoned and rejected, and is playing pursuit here. She's present. And so, what do you need to give her in that moment? Do you need to just like hold her, remind her she's safe, that she's going to be okay? Do you need to take a walk and move some energy? Do you need to do like a loving act towards yourself? What do you need to do in that moment to take care of yourself, rather than thinking that somebody else is going to take care of this feeling, and feeling like the only way to get out of this feeling is by somebody else? Then you're so just out of control.
How much of our anxiety in dating do you think has to do with our self worth or lack of self worth?
Uh, Nearly all of it. I would say there's two elements, which one is like an energetic element, which I would say comes into self-worth and your self-esteem and how you perceive yourself and what you believe you're able to have and you're deserving of, and what you're just kind of, I hate the word standards, but kind of like what your standards are and what you're willing to accept and not accept would maybe be a better way of putting it.
Right.
So if if you have low self-worth, you're more likely to be like, it doesn't matter, like it's okay when the guy doesn't schedule a date or doesn't show up on the date. You're like, I'll give him another chance. But if you're in high self-worth, you'd be like, I'm not available for that. I'm mature enough and wanting a relationship with somebody is reliable, and therefore I want to value that within inside of myself, and I'm not going to accept anything that cannot kind of come into that and match me there. The other element, I think, is education and understanding around how to cultivate a relationship. So your own part in communication, your own part in responsibility, your own part in understanding the dynamics of men and women, or relationships as a whole, versus just thinking that if we have the highest self-worth, we can still have terrible relationships because we don't have the ability to communicate clearly, or we don't have the ability to
Right.
receive love or accept or just kind of navigate conflict and all of these things. So I do think both kind of come hand in hand.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were walking us through, like, when you're in your high self-worth, like, well, what if, somebody really had, like, an emergency come up and
Yeah.
they couldn't show up on the date and you're like, "Well, I don't have time for that," but they're like they genuinely, like, are a good person and
Mhm.
want to reschedule, and you're like, "No, you wasted my time," and you
Yeah.
kind of, I feel like, in a way, can write people off when maybe that's not
Mhm.
warranted.
Yeah, well, I would say that that's more like maturity and like knowing the other person.
Mhm.
So if they were to message you like 3 hours after the date and be like, "Oh, sorry, something came up," then that's something to question. But if they were like, "Hey, look, I'm so sorry, this happened," or they messaged you an hour before or like 10 minutes after, then you can kind of realize what kind of person somebody is based upon the way that they're communicating with you as well. So there is, in everything, and especially in dating and relationships, there's nuance in everything, right? Which I'm sure you find challenging sometimes in the podcast. It's not just like one way is this is how you should show up and this is how you should communicate. It depends on the depends on the situation, depends on
Yeah.
the people, it depends on the moment. But yeah, definitely, it's just kind of feeling that out and knowing inside of yourself what is the right thing to do here.
What about when it comes to sitting with the discomfort? Sitting with
Mhm.
the discomfort of this person didn't show up to the date and I don't know why, or this person hasn't texted me back and, I really want them to text me back, or like you just were really vulnerable with somebody and you're waiting for their response. Like, how do you suggest, or like, what's the healthiest, most productive way to learn to sit with that discomfort that we
Mhm.
feel in every phase of the dating
Mhm.
process?
Yeah. Great question. I would really, again, like, depends on the situation. Sometimes like the best thing to do is just to go and do something fun and playful. I think we live in an era, our generation is becoming really good at being self-aware and processing things and finding our patterns, but sometimes that can be a culprit in and of itself. Sometimes we don't need to sit down and we don't need to like figure out why we're feeling this and where this stems from, and there is times for doing that and there's times for just like going and enjoying your life. So it's finding a healthy balance in that. I think when you're feeling the discomfort, it's asking yourself what's present here. What am I feeling right now? What do I need to, or like, how can I, like, what do I need in this moment? Do I need to sit down and meditate and just breathe for a moment? Do I need to write out my feelings? Do I need to go dance in the street? Do I need to go hang out with a friend and forget about this for a moment? And it's just learning in each moment. It's always going to be different. And it's learning to do the thing that is most healthy for you in that moment. So, and we know the difference between I need right now to go get drunk with my friends when that's avoidance versus fun. We can know that. We sense that in our bodies. We're smart enough to know that.
Mhm.
And we can feel a little guilty in that. So it's just like listening and hearing that for yourself. And not shaming or judging yourself if you do that. It's like, it's okay. We're allowed to misbehave and have fun too. So all in all, I feel like that's not a very helpful answer, but just really be kind to yourself and ask yourself what you need, and just pursue that in all the different ways that it is. I would hate to say every time you feel discomfort, you have to sit down and breathe for 10 minutes and sit with it and make sure you feel every inch of it. Sometimes it's not that.
Totally. No, but I mean, it's so simple that we forget to do it most of the time, but what you just said, ask yourself what you need. Like, we rarely remember to do that, and we'll jump to do that for our friends, for our loved ones, like, "What do you need? What can I do for you?" But we rarely think to ask ourselves, like, "What can I do for me?"
Yeah.
Yesterday even, I don't know where this came from, I still don't know why it happened, but I was feeling so, like, shaky and restless, and I was even, like, trying to type and get work done, like, my hands were shaking, and I'm like I sat, I'm like, "What is going on right now?" Like, I ate, I've had water, like, I've gone for a walk, like, I don't understand, and I ended up just, like, I did decide, I was like, I need to get snap out of this somehow, but, like, what do I need? What can I do to not feel this way anymore? And I was really proud of myself for that, and I ended up, like, pausing. I stopped working for, like, 10 minutes. I, like, stood up, I did take some deep breaths, I took my dog for a walk, and I came back, and at some point, I stopped being shaky. I don't know when it
Mhm.
happened, but I was able to kind of, think about it, like, what can I do for myself? Why am I feeling this way? I couldn't figure that one out, but
Mm.
I at least, like, took the time rather than trying to power through this feeling of, like, "Ah."
Yeah, which is amazing. And I love that you said that you're like, it was 10 minutes, because so often, we start feeling this feeling and we avoid it by doing everything else. And if we just paid attention to it for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes
Mhm.
we just need to cry for 2 minutes and then it's gone and it's over. And then we don't have to wrestle with it for the rest of the day. But so many of us spend so much time, weeks, months, years, like avoiding the discomfort that's there versus addressing it. And obviously,
Mhm.
depending on your relationship, if you've been with somebody for 20 years and there's something there that needs addressing that could end things, that's a bigger thing to obviously sit with. And that can be really scary. And yeah, so it's just obviously like depends on the thing. But most of the time, if we just sat in the discomfort for 5, 10, 15 minutes, it would dissipate. And then we get to move forward and we don't have to sit for the rest of our day in this anxious feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really cool to see how quickly things can change when you do, like, give yourself that time and space for them.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, you're in a relationship now.
I am. Yes.
How did you guys meet? Tell
Mhm.
us the story.
Yeah. So, my just like my journey was, uh, I'd been dating for a while in London and on and off, and exploring things, and then I just kind of like gave it all in, and I was like, I'm moving back up north. I'm from the north of England. I moved back home last July. And I just like was uninterested in dating at all, because I didn't want to settle there. And so I was like, I don't really want to meet somebody here because I don't want to be like held to being here. So I wasn't thinking about dating. I was really focused on studying and work. And one of my best friends, she actually lives in Maine. Um, and we've been friends for like 4 years, and she'd never mentioned her cousin before. We were in Portugal and last summer, and she mentions her cousin, how he's cute and really good at guitar and like really smart. And I was like, oh cool, like but he lives in the States, and so I didn't really think too much of it. I was like, cool, like he seems like a great guy, but whatever. And then
Yeah,
a
like, cool,
month.
there's, like, a nice, cute guitar player somewhere in the
Right,
US,
like,
like, cool, good for
cool.
him.
Yeah. And then they had a phone call after her Portugal trip just to kind of like catch up as cousins, and she'd shown him some pictures of her trip, and obviously I was in them. He was like, "Who's that cute girl?" And then she was like, "Oh my god, you guys would actually, be really great." And he ended up following me on Instagram, and um it's so funny. He'll hate that I'm sharing this, but he was like liking my Instagram stories, but like never messaged me. And I ended up messaging him and being like, hey, when are you going to stop liking my Instagram stars and start messaging me?
I'm obsessed.
And he was like, I was going to do it
Obsessed.
today. I promise. It was like, oh my, I was going to do it today. And we just started talking and we just had a lot in common. He's a psychiatrist. Obviously, I'm a hypnotherapist. And we're both like very like goofy and silly and playful, but then very deep and intimate and big lovers of connection and depth. And we both just like love to have a good time. And we ended up talking online because we were both like living in two different countries. And then I ended up coming to visit him for 8 days, which extended into like 12 days. And we decided like for the first 5 days we were not allowed to discuss whether this was going to be a relationship or not, because we didn't want to have the pressure of, we just like needed to experience being with each other before we could like decide that. But
Right.
we already were like so into each other and so aligned on most things, and everything felt really easy. And I just remember being here and like 3 days in, him like looking at me and he just goes, I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's going pretty well. And
Oh,
we just ended up getting on so well, and now we live together, and moved back to the States, and yeah, we're just thriving, and it's the most healthy, beautiful, loving, calm relationship that I have ever experienced.
that is amazing, and I love that you're like,
Mhm.
one day we started talking, and then it's crazy, like, one day you just start talking, and then you never stop.
Yeah, seriously, it's so wild how fast things can change, and how, yeah, so I hate this, but like also it's so true. Like when you know, and um
Mhm,
we'd both been doing our own work to, better ourselves and be better communicators and understand ourselves and our needs and stuff. And we'd both been doing that separately. And I think we had both been kind of like praying for each other and helping out and waiting out for each other. He'd been dating as well and had met some great girls, but nothing that he kind of felt was it. And I
mhm,
was like the same. And when we met each other, we were like, oh, like this makes so much sense. This is exactly what we've both
mhm.
been looking for.
How did you approach getting into this relationship without letting yourself become codependent again?
Yeah, great question. I think knowing yourself is one of the most important things. So knowing what your needs are, and also being able to check in with your needs often. So there's many, most days I'm like checking in with myself. How am I feeling? Is there anything I need? And if something feels like off for me, just checking in, where am I letting myself go? Or where am I like putting myself aside? And, there are obviously things that you are in a relationship, and so you do compromise in some ways, of course. But if I'm not showing up as myself, or I'm feeling suppressed or repressed in some way, what element of me, because I know myself, because I spent time getting to know myself, is not being put out into the world? Like, where am I holding myself back? Am I not seeing my friends as much as I want to? Am I not dressing in the way that feels good for me? Am I not, having enough solo time? Am I not taking the walks that make me feel good? And just making sure that I am making time for me and for myself and for my needs and the things that make me feel good. And I think it's really important to just like communicate that with the other person, and me to know that he knows that when I'm needing solo time, it's not because I don't love him or that I don't want to be with him, or it's that dramatic. It's just I need a little moment, and that's fine. And so I think it's, yeah, all of those stories that we create in our heads when you're feeling a lot more secure in yourself and in your relationship, the
Mhm.
stars are a lot more quiet, so then you're able to tend to yourself more. I'm not worried about, is he going to be all right with me, going to see my friends tonight? Is he going to feel bad about that? Which I used to feel in the past.
Yeah, and it also goes to show how important it is to take the time to get to know yourself, because now you know what you need and you can take what you need, and you also there's so much importance in being with a partner who's also done that work so that they can understand, like, oh, she's not trying to, get away from me. She just like needs a night to herself. And that's completely valid.
Yeah. And I was saying that, if you're already in a relationship and maybe your pattern has been, you kind of been a little bit passive aggressive or resentful if your partner goes to do something with his guy friends and you're like, yeah, sure, you can go. Or you're like, yeah, but I'm going to miss you. Or that means that like you hold some kind of grudge against it. That's unfair. And there's a part of you there that is um, just a part of you there that is afraid of something. And so we can't take that out on our partners. We have to sit with that in ourselves of, okay, he's going out with his friends. That doesn't mean he doesn't love me. That doesn't mean that he doesn't care. I can like self-soothe myself. And it's the same thing whether you're in a relationship or you're dating, but just sitting with that discomfort and being like, all is well, he's allowed to have fun. And kind of like giving him that privilege gives you that privilege, and trusting him in him going out with his friends, like also, makes him trust you in going out with your friends. So I think just to say that when you are more secure in yourself or more secure in your relationship, these things tend to be a lot more easier, but it doesn't mean that you have to be in a relationship before you're secure. You can kind of navigate these things as you're in a relationship. And, I was really secure in myself before I got into my relationship, but being in a relationship brought up things that I needed to work through themselves, still do bring up things that I need to work through. And it's just having compassion and understanding for yourself in that process and not blaming your partner for your insecurities.
Absolutely. And I think there's such a difference. I know for me, in previous relationships, anytime that they would want to spend the night with somebody else, whether it was their friend, even their family, I
Mm,
would take it as a personal threat of like, well, they don't want to spend the night with me, or
yeah.
who knows who they might meet when they go out to dinner with their best friend, but who knows who's going to be at the table next to them. Like, I was so insecure and so not trusting because of what things that had happened to me in previous relationships, that I like couldn't handle it.
Mhm,
And it took a long time of me then being on my own, then realizing like who I am and what I have to offer and what my worth is, to then get into this relationship with my now husband, where I've never once felt threatened by him wanting to have a boys' night or go out
mhm.
and drink a bunch of beers with his friends. I'm just like, "Yeah, like, go do that. Great. I'll watch Desperate Housewives or Friends or whatever." Like, perfect. Win-win. And it feels so much better to not have everything that someone else does
Mm,
feel like a personal attack to you or like a threat
mhm.
to you.
Yeah, 100%. I love that you said that. One thing that just came to mind is that um, I was talking to somebody last night and we are talking about codependency and we're talking about like this metaphor of guitar strings, right? And a guitar and how each string represents a person. Like, so you might be one string, your partner might be another string, their family might be another string, their friends might be another string, your friends might be